This is the Honest Narcissist. This channel isn't therapy or professional advice. I'm just talking honestly about my own narcissistic behavior, self-awareness, relationships, and what trying to change actually feels like. First of all, I have to say that the decision to change my narcissistic behavior was not as simple or as clear as it might sound. Yes, I already had the intention to change, and I wanted to change too, but self-awareness doesn't appear overnight. At least it didn't for me. The level of awareness I have today is much stronger than it was back then. It grew gradually, and honestly, I'm still working on it today. When I first decided I wanted to change, it felt like my personality had split into two parts. One part of me was saying, "Why would you willingly take on such a huge challenge? You don't even know if it's possible. Look around. Everyone says narcissists can't change. You've lived your whole life doing whatever you wanted. Do you really want to stop living for yourself now? Why would you do that? It's easier not to change. People don't change." That was one side of me. Those were real thoughts going through my head. But then there was another part of me saying, look at how much pain you've already caused other people, not just strangers, the people closest to you. And honestly, I felt ashamed of all my narcissistic behavior. Images of my worst actions would come into my mind, fragments of conversations, my reactions, my psychological abuse, my rage episodes, my passive-aggressive behavior. I felt an enormous amount of guilt, and strangely enough, that guilt created the opposite feeling too. It created determination, a strong desire to change, a desire to get rid of my destructive behavior, to stop it immediately and start acting differently. For the first time, I felt like I wanted to be an adult, like I wanted to take responsibility for what I had done. I felt masculine. I felt that changing would be the honest thing to do, both for myself and for other people. But that euphoric feeling of I'm going to change everything starting now never lasted, because that other side of me never disappeared. Sometimes it was just quieter. It would sit somewhere in the background, barely audible. But then the next day, that selfish voice could become much louder again. And suddenly I would start doubting whether I really wanted to change at all. My determination would weaken. All that remained was a rational thought. Yes, you want to change. Do you really want to keep behaving like a child? Grow up already. In the beginning, these conflicting feelings happened all the time. The distance between them was very short. I could stay committed for a few days. Then, a week later, I'd find myself accusing my wife of things and acting passive-aggressively all over again. I remember spending a lot of time searching for information online. I hoped I would find advice that would make the process easier. But most of what I found was generic self-help advice that simply didn't work in real life. I also tried finding Facebook groups specifically for narcissists who wanted to recover and change. At the time, I only found one, but I left fairly quickly. There wasn't much activity, and I couldn't find what I was actually looking for. One book that had a significant impact on me was Stop Hurting the Woman You Love, Breaking the Cycle of Abusive Behavior. That book helped me see my abusive behavior as something real. Because when you're living in narcissistic behavior, you're extremely forgiving toward yourself. You excuse almost everything. You justify your actions. Or you simply don't see the damage you're causing. That book changed the way I viewed my behavior. It took my understanding to another level and gave me practical advice. And it made me want to change even more. I also followed a couple of YouTube channels where recovering narcissists shared their experiences. Around the same time, I became deeply interested in channels about spiritual growth and awakening. Those helped me maintain a higher level of awareness and consciousness during that period of my life. One of the hardest stages came at the very beginning. It happened when I started letting go of my old behavior and my old identity, because I suddenly realized that I had no idea who the new version of me was. That was when I experienced what I can only describe as an identity crisis. Through a psychotherapist's channel, I learned about the structure of narcissistic personality development. A simplified explanation goes something like this. In early childhood, the ego develops. At roughly the same age, between 3 and 6 years old, another psychological structure develops as well, what psychology calls the superego. The superego acts as an inner critic and an inner conscience. In a healthy person, the superego helps them recognize mistakes and experience healthy guilt. But when a child experiences psychological trauma, emotional neglect, or receives love only for achievements rather than for who they are, something different happens. The child begins to believe, as I am unlovable, as I am, something is wrong with me. To protect themselves from shame, they bury their vulnerable true self deep inside, and in its place they create a false self, a version that appears perfect, powerful, special, and incapable of making mistakes. The narcissistic superego then splits into two extremes. One side becomes the ideal self, demanding perfection, power, uniqueness, and superiority. The other side becomes a harsh internal critic, and when mistakes happen, instead of creating healthy guilt, it creates overwhelming shame and destructive self-criticism. Not, I made a mistake, but you are nothing. As a result, the narcissistic person begins living almost entirely through this false self, while the real personality remains hidden underneath. Now imagine what happened when I started rejecting my old behavior. I wasn't just rejecting behavior, I was rejecting everything I thought I was. It felt like I was killing my own personality, destroying my own identity. And what remained underneath was a psychologically and emotionally immature 6-year-old child that had been hidden deep inside me all those years. I felt like I had to get to know myself all over again. I realized I didn't really know who I was. I didn't know what I genuinely liked. I didn't know what goals I actually wanted to pursue. I felt as if I had lost years of my life and needed to somehow catch up. Fear took over. I didn't know how I was supposed to continue living. I felt extremely vulnerable. It was a period that looked a lot like depression from the outside, but it wasn't depression. The closest thing I can compare it to is what many spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul. A period of spiritual, existential, and psychological crisis where a person experiences a complete loss of meaning, deep sadness, and inner emptiness. That description felt very close to what I was experiencing. My old value system was collapsing. My ego identity was collapsing. My life goals were collapsing. The behavioral patterns that had once given me a sense of safety were disappearing, and suddenly I was left without any of it. That was when I slowly started building a new version of myself, new values, new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving, and I started learning what emotional maturity actually means. But that's a topic for future videos. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and helps more people who are searching for similar answers find these videos too.